So welcome everyone. First of all, I just kind of wanted to let you all know that the session is being recorded. I think we'll also send out these presentation slides after the session, and I also think the link to the recording. So if you want to kind of pass this on to any of your colleagues. Yeah, so thank you for attending this successful tendering Procurement Essentials webinar. My name is Phil Blackmore. I'm the Procurement Manager at SWPA. Just for those who don't know me, I've got around 16 years of procurement experience across both private and public sectors within a number of industries, including the NHS, aerospace and defence, and also social housing. I've also had a few years working as an estimator for a small local building company, so I've also experienced my fair share of bidding and tendering, and and the highs and lows that brings. Just to kind of run through the agenda for the session. So our director Mary Bennell will just kick off with a couple of slides to introduce SWPA. I'll then take you through the main section of the webinar, and I'll start off by explaining the differences between a DPS and a framework, just mainly because I'll be speaking about DPS as a framework quite a bit during the slides. So if you don't already know, it'd be useful for you to know this information before we kind of dive too deep into the session. Then I'll give a brief overview of public sector procurement, and I mean a very brief overview. Then we'll go on to the benefits of bidding for frameworks and DPSs. We'll then discuss the perceived barriers of bidding within the public sector, particularly for SMEs, and then we'll look at how we can overcome those perceived barriers, and how do we make our frameworks more accessible to SMEs. I'll then explain how you can make the tendering experience less onerous and more effective, and then some hints and tips to improve your tendering experiences and ultimately your responses. Finally, I'll quickly just touch on a couple pieces of information that's come out from the government over the last few years, trying to help streamline public sector tendering. And I also have a slide towards the end with a load of links to websites and portals that we'll discuss through this session. So you'll obviously have that once you receive the presentation pack. I'll talk about Q&A shortly. Our technical manager Kay Wills will then take over and give you an overview of our up and coming ASC1 Asset Safety and Compliance Framework. And so I'm hoping that will take around 40 to 45 minutes in total. And there is a chat Q&A function. There'll be two opportunities to have your questions answered, one after my presentation and then one after Kay's. But just to get you thinking about tendering and bidding, there's a few questions I just want to show, and it would be great to get your feedback on them. So it would be good to know whether you've bidded for public sector contracts or frameworks previously, whether you were successful or not, what was your experience of the process, were there any particular difficulties, and then if you had any suggestions or improvements we could potentially make as a framework provider, or any changes you would like to see within public sector tendering in general. So please feel free to use the chat function, and then when we get to the kind of Q&A session, I'll try and go over a few of those. So over to Mary, if you just go over the next couple of slides, please.
Yeah, hello everybody, and great to see so many people here. Some of you know us very well and some of you not so well. So just two slides from me. South West Procurement Alliance is part of the LHC group, which has been in existence for nearly 60 years now. LHC standing for London Housing Consortium, because we were set up originally by a group of London housing authorities. But now we are a regional organisation. So there's ourselves, SWPA in the southwest, WPA in Wales, SPA in Scotland, CPC in the sort of central bit of England, and then London and the southeast in the southeast and London. So we are the regional face, we are the client facing, the regional supplier contractor facing bit of the organisation, And then we have our central office in Uxbridge, the Centre of Technical Excellence, where they do all the detailed procurement, they do all the detailed evaluation and provide us with technical advice and support and other support services. Can we go on to the next slide, please, Phil? So just to say, that's enough about LHC and our central team and our regional bit. So we are a small team. This is us. We're based at Partridge House in Kenford. For any of you who know the area, Partridge House is a big bicycle warehouse, and we reside above their storage units just behind the big bicycle warehouse, which has a very nice cafe as well, just opposite the Orange Elephant. So we're there. There's me, the director, Kay, whom you'll hear from later, who's our technical support manager, Phil, who's our procurement manager. He's introduced himself. Penny, our client support manager, whom I'm sure many of you have met. She's the front end, the business development end of our team, but everybody does everything. And last but not least, Dominica, who is our sort of hub, our local hub, and deals with all our inquiries and deals with all our admin and research. So that's enough from me. Over to you, Phil, I think.
Yep, thank you, Mary. Hopefully you can all hear me again. So we at LHC and SWPA offer two types of product, a dynamic purchasing system, so a DPS, and a framework. So in simple terms, frameworks and DPSs help public sector buyers to procure goods and services from a list of pre-approved suppliers and contractors. They're often divided into lots by product or service type, and also by geographical area. The number of suppliers and contractors differ from framework to framework, depending on what is being offered. So a DPS has no maximum duration, whereas a framework generally lasts for 4 years. A direct award option is taken away within a DPS, but can be used within a framework. A DPS is always open to applications, whereas a framework will have one window of opportunity, and if you're unsuccessful, then that's that opportunity gone for 4 years, fundamentally. Buyers can onboard companies quickly through a DPS, so they can be included within a mini competition. So if a buyer wants a particular company on a DPS, they can be onboarded quite quickly, whereas as that opportunity is closed within a framework. A framework offers a fixed list of suppliers, and with a DPS, the list can be ever changing. There is a less onerous application process with a DPS. This option is obviously great for the bidder from an application perspective, but potentially means a bit more work for both the client and the contractors and suppliers during the call off. So the main differences between the two mainly are down to flexibility within the application process and the different call off options available. So developing and creating a framework or DPS means that we have to adhere to public contract regulations, PCR regulations in 2015, and it's a legal requirement for public sector buyers. It means that goods, services and works over a certain threshold legally have to be advertised through what was OJU but is now called FTS, or Find a Tender Service, and those are the current thresholds. So any construction work above that £5 million threshold has to be advertised through that Find a Tender Service, but we'll talk a bit more about that later on. So frameworks and DPSs offer public sector buyers a more efficient route to market, as a lot of the complex, time-consuming, resource-intensive work has already been carried out by the framework provider. So the buyer can exploit these procurement products by either a direct award, which potentially can take 3 to 4 weeks, or a mini competition, which can be anything from 2 to 3 months. These regulations are due to be revised over the next 12 to 18 months, we believe. So I'm sure I'll have the opportunity to do another webinar at some point and we'll obviously let you know once that, once we do that. So the benefits, what are the benefits for you for bidding for frameworks and DPSs? It's a great way to work with public sector bodies, so putting yourself in the shop window. As I've said, it's a faster procurement process, particularly with a direct award option, which most frameworks will offer. But even with a mini competition, that process should be significantly more efficient due to being on a framework, because you've already proven your capabilities through the application process. Large programs of work can go through a framework, so buyers can put through programs of work for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, as long as that contract's put in place prior to the framework expiring. You can put a contract in place, so it doesn't just have to be for one-off projects. Clients can also direct award, and one of the justifications with our framework alliance contract is based on previous work or relationship. So there is potential for more work after, if you delivered a successful project, for example. And this also could help nourish a long-term partnership with the buyer and guarantee an income. So have I skipped a slide? Sorry. And working with public sector organisations generally give you more assurance as well in relation to payment terms and on-time payments. And performance measurement systems designed to encourage continuous improvements. I mean, frameworks should be viewed as a long-term relationship whereby you are working together to deliver sustained, ongoing improvement. And although the upfront effort is generally quite high, and is needed to establish a framework and to get on the framework, the downstream benefits will far outweigh this. So public sector procurement has a stigma of being complex and a huge investment for the tenderer. This is true to some extent, I have to agree, and this is mainly because of the legislation and the law surrounding public sector procurement, which we have briefly kind of touched on, but as well as public sector clients requiring certain assurances around value for money, financial stability, quality, being transparent, that sort of thing. Some interesting stats. I was reading the Supply Management magazine recently, and they carried out a survey with about 200 SME directors, and I read that only 4% of those companies actually had in-house bid writers. So it meant 41% of the bids were being written by business development teams, 34% by directors and senior managers, and 15% by marketing teams. So this clearly shows the difficulty when bidding for public sector contracts. 10% of those companies stated they'd given up bidding for public sector contracts, while 21% stated that they had never bid for public sector work at all. So 31% of SMEs during that survey are not even in the game. I also found out that around 90% of UK SMEs say that the public sector should do more to remove tendering barriers when it comes for bidding for contracts. So obviously this is some of the points that we'll come on to today. So first of all, what are those perceived barriers? The first one being uncertainty around how to access opportunities. There are portals and websites you can register with to receive information, to receive notifications relating to current and future tender opportunities. This includes the Find a Tender service that we've talked about. We've also got Contracts Finder and also our e-tendering portal, which is Intend, all of which I've included as links in another slide further on. So the key is to make sure that you're registered on these portals and you've received the right notifications. There's also some work you can do around choosing the correct CPV codes, but I'll talk about that in a future slide. I've kind of put these three things together really. So overall complexity, time and resource intensive, as they kind of technically sit together and are very much linked. And this is the problem for SMEs versus the large organisations who have bid teams who can deal with the complexity, can have more time, have more resource. But there are ways in which organisations can help improve the overall complexity and speed of bidding, including what you can do for yourself to improve that efficiency. But I will discuss them in a short while. Difficulty meeting mandatory qualifying criteria and high thresholds. Again, this is probably more of an issue with SMEs who don't hold certain qualifications, accreditations, or have the adequate financial status. I think the key here is to take away as much of the mandatory criteria as possible while still making sure that the necessary information is obtained. This is actually kind of one of the main reasons why we and other organisations are moving more towards DPSs, and they're becoming more and more popular, because they used to be used more for commodity type items, if you like, but because of the flexibility that they offer, particularly in relation to SME accessibility, they are now being used within construction and within the public sector realm. And in relation to this perceived barrier, DPS doesn't tend to have too much in the way of mandatory criteria. This is mainly due to the product being more client-led, and the client being able to decide at call-off what mandatory qualifying criteria and thresholds that they want to put in place at a project level. Short deadlines. I mean, I don't see this being too much of an issue, particularly within the public sector, as we're kind of governed and we have to adhere to certain minimum tender periods, particularly for the above threshold procurements. I'm not quite sure what the minimum turnaround time limit. I think it's about 35 days. I think is the minimum tender period that buyers have to allow. But we certainly give, I mean, from a framework perspective, we certainly give our bidders sufficient time to bid, and it's usually, you know, anything from 8 weeks. But I would say if you ever felt a deadline was too short, certainly flag this up with us or with the contracting authority early on. And sometimes tender deadlines can get extended, especially if a few bidders request more time. Scriptive specifications that limit innovation. I mean, one thing off the top of my head is I thought about was making more use of performance specifications rather than conformance specifications. This will certainly help more around innovation, but the difficulty lies within the evaluation process, I guess, and how do you measure innovation from one company to another? So it feels very subjective to evaluate one company's innovative bid versus another. I mean, any suggestions on this would be gratefully received, but I know that we'll come on to this a bit later on, but the government are looking to introduce a new procurement procedure within the new procurement regulations, which potentially opens up innovation. So watch this space. Too costly? I mean, this may be based on being unsuccessful in the past. Bidding costs money, and if you aren't seeing any return on investment, it's then very difficult to then bid and again. I've been there. I certainly feel your pain in that respect. So there's this perception that public sector organisations only want to work with bigger companies. I actually think this is probably the opposite, especially within the public sector, as most public sector buyers will have internal governance around giving more opportunity to work with SMEs. And again, I will explain in another slide, but the government are also trying to implement policy around SMEs. So the lack of or poor feedback process. One company's didn't win, and then they don't know why. They don't know how to improve next time around. So the chances are they'll just give up. But public bodies should offer every bidder the opportunity to obtain detailed feedback, particularly with the above threshold procurements and framework bidding processes. They may not always give a detailed feedback through your unsuccessful award letter, but you're legally entitled to gather this feedback from them. So just pick up the phone or drop them an email, and they should give you that feedback. So what are we doing at LHC and SWPA to make public sector framework bidding more accessible to SMEs and taking away some of those perceived barriers? So the first one is we do carry out quite intensive market analysis and pre-tender engagement prior to shaping and developing a framework, particularly when it comes to SMEs. SME accessibility is reviewed on a framework by framework basis, and then depend on the type of service offered within that framework. It's very much an intelligence-led approach, which is very much client-led as well, and this information kind of drives the design of that framework. Regional capability, capacity, and assessments, again, depending on the framework and type of services within that framework. We sometimes, well, we will go out on a local level, but sometimes on a very local level. We request bids from companies who can deliver those services, not just at county level, but regional and sometimes even down to town level. And in terms of regional assessments, we ask questions regarding service delivering, and that gives local bidders an opportunity to sell themselves on what they can deliver at that local level. We use multiple value bands. We hold restrictions on some of those to enable opportunities for SMEs, as the larger organisations, as we know, will probably tend to bid for all lots. But we are putting restrictions in place on certain lots that they can apply for. So this obviously gives SMEs more opportunity and will mean they're competing more against similar companies rather than against those larger organisations. And we'd also, so for the higher lots, for the higher valued lots, we potentially tend to ask for more levels of information. So, possibly higher levels of insurance, for example, higher levels of accreditation. The whole idea is to help develop companies and not to put barriers in their way. All of our frameworks are more in favour of quality than price. So most will be weighted at 70-30, some at 60-40, and maybe even some at 80-20. I'll have to check. But this is great and certainly works in favour of those companies who can demonstrate what they can do rather than how cheap they can do it. And finally, we have our new e-tendering system, as I mentioned, Intend. The main reason for this really was to help minimise the bidding process time for bidders, and this is done via two ways. So bidders, through the bidding process, you'll only see what you need to complete. So if you're bidding for a particular lot, you only see the information and documents relating to that lot. So it just means you're not viewing and looking at hundreds of documents and wondering, what on earth do I need to complete? So that's quite a good function. And then also within the selection questionnaire process, the system has the capability of storing previous questions and answers. So if you're tendering for if you've tendered for a previous framework and then tendering for another framework, what it will do is store your previous responses, so you don't have to carry on repeating that work. You obviously still need to check that information is still valid before you upload your bid, but yeah, another good function of the system. So as previously mentioned, only 4% of SMEs have a bid writing team, and I've been on that bidding side myself, so I can appreciate the time and effort required into bidding. So let's just say we've overcome some of the perceived barriers of frameworks and public sector tendering, and now you're interested in bidding. So how can you improve your tender responses? So the first one being to target your best fit tenders. So if lack of resources is an issue, there's no point pushing through and churning out multiple tenders. This will only increase the pressure and have an impact on the quality of your response. So developing a focused targeting strategy will be crucial to finding out your potential best fit opportunities. And it's also key that these are aligned to your business goals and strategy. So as I mentioned before, part of the strategy should be to define CPV codes and keywords to be used in searches on some of these portals. So in particular, through contract notices, through the Find the Tender service portal. If you don't know what a CPV code are, they're a system of classification for public procurement. So for example, there's a CPV code for refurbishment work. There's a CPV code for asbestos removal work. Again, on the links page that you'll get through the presentation pack, I've also included a link to a website called BIP Solutions, if you're not aware of it. And it's basically just a search bar where you enter the type of work your organization offers, and then it should bring up a CPV code or CPV codes, which either relates specifically to that service or will be a very close fit. So it's crucial you register on these portals within our Intend system, within the Find the Tender service, within Contracts Finder, and using those correct CPV codes as because what the buyer is doing is also when they're uploading tenders and tender information, they will be putting in CPV codes themselves. So it's crucial that you get notified when those opportunities come up, but that you will only see those notifications if you enter the correct CPV code. So it's quite an important piece of information, that I think. Time is probably one of the biggest barriers to securing high evaluation scores, particularly. Bid teams will no doubt be rushing to complete tender responses and may even be forced to reuse low scoring responses and have little time to improve the content. So reviewing your whole bid journey, the processes and the people is really critical, as it will identify inefficiencies and resource limitations and will help highlight areas for improvement. And finding ways to streamline those workflows and reduce manual repeated activities will free up time and allow you to kind of finesse and improve your tender responses. Probably one of the most time-consuming activities is the sourcing and management of large volumes of tender-related content. And information tends to sit on individual hard drives, and sometimes those files are inaccessible. So actually building a centralized library of standard content, just using logical folder structures and categorization will allow you to easily manage and update information. It'll also allow you to be able to search and find required information for use in tender responses. The tender questions will cover many areas of your business, including operational, financial, HR, pricing, and will require input from different people and departments. So these people will also have their own roles and responsibilities and may not necessarily prioritize and allocate suitable time to your tender. So it's therefore essential that these people are engaged with early and they understand their roles and responsibilities through the process. These people will also need access to the evaluation criteria and scoring mechanisms for their allocated questions. So tender submissions include a great deal of information about your business and risks associated with using inaccurate data will be high if content is managed incorrectly. This ultimately will result in low evaluation scores. So it's, excuse me. So it's crucial that your standard business information and documentation is regularly reviewed and updated, and this will provide a good foundation when extracting data to compile your tender responses. So as well as the detailed supplier questionnaire and ITT response documents, the buyer will also provide several other documents containing valuable information to help you answer the questions. So the assessment of this valuable resource can often be rushed, resulting in limited understanding of the evaluation process and the scoring criteria. This results generally in poorly constructed tender responses and low scores. So again, time will need to be built into the project plan to properly assess the tender documentation, as each document will provide a different insight into the needs of the buyer and their approach to the overall tender evaluation. So as you probably know, a lot of public sector tenders will consist of a lot of questions. However, many of the questions will be similar across multiple tenders. To save you time, you may be tempted to keep copying and reusing responses from previous tenders, but unfortunately these may be low scoring responses, so you know that you've not won the tender on previously. So it's obviously important to optimize every question. It's important to understand each question and the scoring mechanisms, and then compile your response, which will need to start with a standard generic response, and then that can be enhanced to answer the key points within that question. So high levels of literacy and creativity will need to be employed to deliver comprehensive, compelling, and competitive responses. Also, while we're on the subject of question responses, most of which will have a word count. I know this is very kind of basic what I'm telling you, but if you went over that word count, there's a very good chance that the words that are over the word count will not count. So it doesn't matter how much work you put into your response. Just please remember not to go over that word count. So we've kind of talked about innovation a little bit, but the best way to stand out from the competition is by focusing on evidence and innovation. So buyers are always looking for better ways for contracts to be delivered. So use this to your advantage. Look over past experiences, highlight any examples of innovation. Anytime you've overcome unforeseen issues, for example, providing evidence really gives weight to your responses. So with deadlines looming, tender responses may be rushed and only approved just in time for submission. And again, I've been in this position many times in the past. Particularly, it's a bit more straightforward now that electronic tendering is coming, and you can just kind of ping an email off or send your submission electronically. But it was a lot worse during the day when you had to hand deliver tender responses. So this as much as it's improved now, it still gives you little or no time to review and self-assess the quality of those responses. So this needs to be a key element of your project plan. So each question and response should be internally reviewed by the subject matter experts prior to submitting. Weak responses can then be easily identified and further work undertaken to improve the quality and increase potential scores. So obviously your organisation will be investing significant amounts of time and resource in completing these tenders. There's generally very little breathing space between bids. This will probably mean that once results are in, whether the tender is won or lost, little or no time will be given to reflect on performance and results. So analysis of past tender responses can provide a great deal of valuable intelligence and insight. So further analysis of requested competitor responses and scores can really help fine-tune the quality of future responses. So really, gather that feedback. Here's just a very quick summary and quick tips as following on from what we've just discussed. So planning is key. Are you actually really ready to submit a bid? Are the right people in place at the right time to submit an on-time quality response? Is it the right opportunity? Could time be better served, on another tender? It sounds this is a very simple thing to say, but make sure you read the question and answer the question. Address the selection criteria. Make sure your offer precisely meets the buyer's needs. Focus on evidence and innovation. Be creative. Remember not to go over the imposed word count. Use and maintain a bid library. Use a proofreader. Give yourself time to proofread before submitting the bid. And submit your tender on time. You really won't forgive yourself if you've put a lot of time and effort into a bid to then it not be going through the evaluation stage because you've submitted it 2 minutes late. And also spend time on the feedback process. Where did things go wrong? What can you do better next time? So I just wanted to mention 2 pieces of work that have been published over the last couple of years to try and transform public procurement and also to create gold standard for frameworks. I think I'm doing okay for time, not yet. So within the Green Paper, the Transforming Public Procurement, the government's goal is to speed up and simplify procurement processes across the public sector, placing value for money at the heart and try to unleash opportunities for small businesses to innovate in public service delivery. So the government's aim is to increase the share of spend with SMEs as outlined in the Green Paper. And I think they're aiming for around 30% of its annual £290 billion expenditure to be with SMEs next year. So here are just a few points that were written in the paper that have some relevance to what we're discussing. So one of them is that procurement that better meets the UK's needs. So it talks around value for money, transparency, integrity, fair treatment of suppliers, that sort of thing. Using the right procurement procedure, it talks about adding this new procedure called the competitive flexible procedure, which offers more flexibility in terms of timescales, the rules behind it, and more importantly, as I've said, it should allow for more innovative bids and evaluation. Awarding the right contract to the right supplier. The main thing here is that it proposes to change the word meet, which previously stood for most economically advantageous tender, and are now calling it MAT, which is most advantageous tender. So, I mean, quite simply, it takes out the word economically, as they felt that this misleads contracting authorities into thinking lower price. The change will add clarity by removing the perceived emphasis on price, and will also include things like social value and environmental considerations. And then also open and transparent contracting. This talks about the new Find the Tender Service portal, and talks about things like a central platform for supplier registrations, that sort of thing. I've included a link further on if you wanted more information on that. And then finally, the constructing the gold standard publication was so this was an independent review of public sector frameworks by Professor David Mosey, and this offered clear recommendations on what gold standard framework should look like. So some of the key points here around early supply chain involvement, collaboration, aggregation, standardization. It talks about offsite manufacturing, social value, innovation. Again, unfortunately, I don't have time to go through this in any more detail, unfortunately. But again, there's a link later on. But please feel free to speak to me at any time after the webinar. We can book in a one-to-one or just drop me an email if you wanted any further information. But what I would say is that we at LHC and SWPA are advocates of the gold standard, and are generally carrying out all our practices in line with these standards and recommendations, and are continuing to evolve to help deliver gold standard frameworks. So this is just I won't go through that, but these are just the links of things that we've talked about. Again, I would very much say if you've got a bit of time to go through these, particularly obviously the portals around tender opportunities and the CPV codes. So I don't know if there's any questions before I move on to Kay. If there's any questions or any feedback, or anything about your experiences within public sector bidding that we can go through now before we move on to Kay. If there's anything in the chat, I don't know if there's anything in the chat, fire is it? I'll just close this down. I don't think there's anything in the chat, is there? Again, I mean, Kay will be coming on very shortly, but if there's anything you think of during Kay's presentation, just put it in the chat, and we might have some time at the end to go through that. And also mine and Kay's details are on a slide at the end, so our email address and phone numbers are there that you can contact either of us if you wanted some more information offline rather than through the webinar. So if I so Kay, I don't know if I listen to presentation mode again. Okay, can you see that, Kay?
Yes, I can see that. Right, I'll take it away, shall I?
Yes, please.
Like Phil says, if anybody's got any questions, pop them in the chat and we can come back to them at the end, no problem at all. So I'm just here to briefly go over the asset safety and compliance framework that we're currently in the process of creating. So it's ASC1 is the code for that. So it's a compliance framework consisting of 5 work streams that will provide clients a compliant method to meet government guidelines for their asset stock for life safety, property protection and maintenance. If you want to go on to the next slide, please, Phil. So it's being developed from some existing and expired frameworks using their specifications along with updated regulations and feedback gained from pre-tender engagement with both clients and our appointed companies. So the 2 live frameworks are the Asbestos Works and Services AS2 and Vacant Property Protection V7, and then the 2 expired ones are Heating Services, which has been a great framework for us, and Legionella Control and Water Management, WM1. I think it's a good time to point out that we've removed the fire aspect from this framework, and we'll be procuring a standalone framework covering fire safety. All the other elements in ASC1 are more about service and maintenance, whereas fire safety covers new work and construction. Another reason is that fire safety requires a different category of supplier with a wider scope of works. Therefore, we feel it's appropriate to warrant a separate framework. We don't currently have the timescales for this framework. However, we'll be keen to engage with pre-tender activity as soon as possible. So it'll be early into next year that we start with the fire safety one. So coming back to ASC1, if you can go on to the next slide, Phil, please. There's 5 proposed work streams which cover essentially the four frameworks that I just mentioned. So we've got asbestos, property protection, water management, gas safety, and then fixed wire testing. And the following 2 slides, I'm not going to go through them, but as Phil said, you'll get the pack with the slides on. It does break down the structure of the work streams in greater detail. So if anybody's got any questions at any point, please do get in touch, and I'm happy to discuss that. If you want to flick through the next 2, Phil, because I'm not going to go through that one or the next one. That's it. So carrying on with the scope, the selection and due diligence requirements for this framework will require minimum insurance levels. However, this will vary according to the specific lot, so I'm not going to go through the insurance levels required. However, it's been decided there'll be no minimum turnover requirements, which is good news for some, and it's to encourage SME and smaller, more local companies to bid on the framework. If we've learnt one thing, we've learnt that our clients really like working and supporting the local businesses around the southwest. So we always say southwest is best down here. So if you want to go on to, also on there, it does mention about the ranking. Some frameworks, the appointed companies are ranked. On this one, it's been decided that they won't be ranked. It gives everybody a fairer shot. However, should clients want to know the ranking, we can release that information to them. If you want to go on to the next slide, Phil. We're currently in the process of pulling all the invitation to tender, the ITT documentation together, and that will be going out hopefully mid-January, and then there'll be the statutory time to return the tenders before the evaluation process begins. And the planned go live date for this one is the 1st of August next year, 23. Next slide, Phil. The framework is going to be procured throughout all of the LHC regions, and it will be set to NUTS level 2. So for us in the southwest at SWPA, this is our coverage on this map here. So it's effectively Gloucester down to Bournemouth, and then everything southwest of that. So that's the region that we cover. And then an open procurement procedure is going to be conducted with the evaluation criteria being a 70-30 split between quality and price. Heavy emphasis on quality, so it's not a race to the bottom on the price. And the levy for this framework is 5%, and that would be included in the agreed maximum rates. I think that's my whistle-stop tour of the ASC1 framework. So like Phil said, if you've got any questions, anybody, do pop it in the chat, or do get in touch direct, not a problem at all to take questions.
Yeah, and if I think Farah, if you might tell me differently, but if you would rather not use the chat function and rather kind of speak openly and ask any questions, then I'm pretty sure we can promote you to do that. So just you know, use the raise hand option and ask your question. But like I said, if there isn't anything, then we'll, you know, feel free to speak to us offline. Our email address, phone number, etc. is there. Oh, Mary, you've come on screen, so I'm assuming you're going to say something.
No, I was just going to say to everybody, you know, people who aren't following us on LinkedIn or on Twitter, please do link in, because we're always providing bits of information and blogs, and sort of we try and keep our website pretty updated with news stories and activities that we're doing. So it'd be really nice if those of you who aren't following us do follow us. And yeah, just like Phil says, please think about the questions. Yes, think about the questions that Phil has asked you. And if you have got any tips, or you know, anything you want to put in the chat, maybe you've responded to one of our previous tenders, then tell us what the pain points have been about them. Yes.
Yeah. Always happy with a bit of constructive criticism. But as I kind of said on one of my previous slides, we are doing what we can around trying to make the process more straightforward and more efficient for you. I know it's a painful experience. I think there's certain things that you know, the procurement regs and law means that we can't change certain things, but you know, within the system, you know, within our new Intent system, around the value bands, around regional capability, we are trying to adapt, and we are trying to make that process more straightforward for you. So but we would absolutely would love your any suggestions or improvements. Like I said, doesn't have to be particularly through the chat, but you know, offline after the webinar would be fantastic. But I assume the pack's been sent out later today or tomorrow, Mary, were they?
Yes.
And
well, give people a chance.
Yeah.
I'm a bit confused. I just saw that Josh Furs had typed something, but he stopped typing, so I don't know whether that's disappeared or whether it just never happened. I don't know whether Josh wanted to say something. It was coming up that he was writing something, but maybe he's I don't know. Oh, here he is. He's coming back, trying to say something. But what's he saying?
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, but whilst you were speaking, but I don't know whether anybody else has got any other comments, yeah, or something to say. Yeah.
For Josh to come through.
Oh yes, Yes, yes. Ah, yes, yes, yes. As Kay said, Josh, yes, we are going to be procuring that separately. We feel it's such an important piece of work, you know, an important area of the business that we're just pulling together the documentation for that. But certainly we are procuring it. We feel it warrants a separate framework at this stage in our business.
I will be in touch, Josh, don't worry.
Yes. Has anybody else got any questions, comments? Oh, Josh again. Yeah, he's just put a hands up. Yes, yes. Anybody else?
Yeah. So what we'll do was we might as well end it there, and like we've said, just give either myself or Kay or Mary a shout if there's anything you think of after the webinar. But so yeah, thank you all for attending.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Bye.